Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dev.
Cheers, everybody. Cheers, Mercedes.
Cheers.
Welcome.
I have my blood orange spindrift today.
Woohoo! I am rock and rolling the lemon spindrift today. And again, if
Amazing.
anybody from Spindrift is listening, we would love to be sponsored by Spindrift because we truthfully love it.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Modus Cafe. Today, we're back with an exciting episode, something that Mercedes and I both feel very, very passionate about. And this conversation comes up naturally a lot. So we were like, hey, why not turn on the screen and the microphone and just talk about it while we're recording so other people can be part of this conversation? Because I feel like some of these good conversations happen off screen. And what we want to talk about today is this idea of making training a lifestyle, meaning implementing training into your everyday life so we can do it consistently throughout the year instead of training in phases just a couple times a year. And the way to think about it is actually to consider going on a diet if you want to change your nutritional habits. Most people can relate to that. There's people out there who might want to lose some weight or they just want to feel healthier. And they come to me and they're like, Katja, I want to change my nutrition, having gone on several diets already. And actually, we see the same thing in athletes with training. This idea being if you go on a diet, you are making changes for a couple weeks and you might see some results if you change those, food patterns for a couple of weeks, but the problem is that as soon as you go back onto your old diet, your weight comes back up or you're feeling just as sluggish again. So the idea with training is the same. If we just train a couple weeks at a time throughout the year, randomly interspersed, just like going on a diet a couple times a year, we might see some improvement over that short period of time, but we might lose those gains that we made in that short period of time because we're now not implementing training as a practice throughout the year. So similar to when we suggest to people to change their nutrition habits to be consistent and essentially just creating a new lifestyle around food or with their food, we're really encouraging our athletes to think that way when it comes to training as well. To implement training into their lifestyle so they're not going through these cycles of feeling like they're in shape and feeling out of shape and in shape. And with that, you're going to see the most gains that happen gradually, but they're going to happen over such a long time that you'll be able to see a lot more gains than you would if you just trained in short spurts. Bursts.
Yeah. I, as a coach, I definitely get really excited when my athletes want to train, when they come to me and they're like, I'm ready to train for a year. Because things can actually flow a lot better. We're not trying to hustle, and it feels like it's almost like I'm behind them trying to pick up the pieces as they're like trailblazing forward through maybe like a 6-week program or a 3-month program. But if you have a year to really develop an athlete, you can get so much done. And like you said, you can see progress even just in a 4-week cycle for sure. You will. But what is it that you're actually working on? And maybe for some people, a 4-week phase at a very high, like if that person is at a very high level, this is the only time that I've seen it really work long term is, okay, I'm going to work on strength for 4 weeks this season. And then next season, I'm going to do one other block of 4 weeks. But this is actually for someone who is consistently showing up and doing other types of climbing training. So I love it when my athletes are in it for the long haul. And like, I do want to touch on some things that you could improve, in 3 months. And I would say 3 months is the minimum if you're going to be training, and 3 months is enough time to figure out a good schedule for yourself. It's enough time to see significant changes in whatever exercises that you're doing. Because there is that repetition, and with training, you do need that repetition. And some people see 1 to 2 grade increases even in just 3 months. But if you, all of a sudden you stop training now and you kind of just float, maybe you're just going out to climb for fun, you will see regressions most likely in your climbing. Maybe you kind of fall off the wagon. You don't have that accountability. Maybe you've kind of like lost the philosophy of like this practice. Um, so yes, you can see improvements in 3 months, but I think, like the depth of change that you see year after year and really like documenting that, I think is really like it's profound for a lot of athletes who do commit to that. And we actually just asked a question in our Mighty Network, in our Strong Together community about, what have you noticed change after a year of committing to training? And there were some really beautiful answers. It wasn't actually, a lot of the answers were surprising to me. Like I thought for sure I'd see a lot more like, oh, I was able to climb this grade. And actually, in the end, like to me, those answers showed that maybe grades aren't everything. And it's more about like how you feel and how you move through the world, and your experience with climbing, and that's what a lot of these people were talking about, and that was really really great.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to see. It's really beautiful to see when people come into training thinking they're seeking one thing and then they're actually getting out something completely different. Yeah.
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
love that about our community as well.
yeah,
One of the things I think we should talk about is actually how we define training, especially in relation to practice, because we just said we encourage athletes to, kind of implement training into their lifestyle and really make it a long game, really make it more of a lifestyle. However, when we say training, we might mean something different than people might think. So I think we do want to define what we mean when we
yeah,
say training. Do you want to
yeah,
go ahead and do that?
totally. Yeah, and even for me, I don't think, like I feel like I'm always training, but again, like that might be a completely different definition to other people. And I think what is common for people to believe that training is supposed to be really, really hard and only done for short periods of time. Um, and like maybe it's like like hyper focused on one specific thing. And I really think it's the intensity. People might hear training and think, oh, that's like high intensity. It must be really hard. And therefore you can only do it for a short amount of time. But in our definition of training is really developing a practice. And this is a developing a practice of showing up consistently. And, when we encourage all of our athletes to go to the gym at least, 3 days a week, two is okay as well. Um, but consistency is the first part. Like make sure that you're getting into the gym and just climbing, if that's like the easiest thing, awesome. And so to me, that is the first step in practicing. And then you can start layering on top of this, like adding a little bit more structure. And structure, again, doesn't mean that your sessions have to be hard. It just puts some sort of focus on that session. And one great thing about working, like training, practicing year round, is that you can work on low hanging fruit and start stacking that low hanging fruit over the year. And when you're constantly coming back to your biggest weaknesses, after you look back after a year, like, wow, I've made huge strides just by focusing on this one thing all year long. And it's not like that's all you're working on, but you are putting some attention to that almost every single session. You're aware of it every single session. So training doesn't have to be drills all the time. It doesn't have to be uh, training to fatigue all the time. I think that's more like strategy and like program design. But like training to me is practice and movement and being intentional consistently.
Yeah, and I actually had a coaching call with our members this morning, and one of the things that our member said is she really likes to think about climbing improvements and climbing training as seasons. There's different seasons to work on different things, and the beautiful thing is here we are trying to tell people that you can get so much done in a year. right? And even just the year, when we think about the year, we have seasons. Well, in most places where I live, we have seasons. We have winter, spring, summer, and fall. So just like the year has seasons, climbing training can be done in seasons as well. So you might have a season of where you focus on technique and your weaknesses. You might have a season where you might focus on strength or whatever, suits your lifestyle. So climbing training does not have to look exactly the same every single week. And it's really more about having intention and not stopping your focus altogether. It's really just having that intention and focus. And when we write programs for our athletes too, most of our athletes, especially our one-on-one athletes and people in our community too, they love climbing outside. And so we put them what we call performance training plans. So that means these training plans are designed that people can go outside and perform and essentially play. But even while they do that, usually what we do is we put them on a maintenance training schedule, meaning that we want to make sure that they're not going to lose all the strength that they had just worked on and build up. So then when they come out of their performance phase, they have maintained their strength baseline that again they just gained, and now they can start their next strength phase at a much higher level because now they have not lost what they gained before. And this is why when we train year round and year after year, we continue to get stronger because we do make sure that we're not losing what we had just gained. Honestly, this
Mhm.
is why I love the analogy with food and with nutrition, because it's very similar. The idea is that we don't want to bounce up and down in terms of our strength and in terms of our, weight, if that is something that
Mhm.
people think about.
Mhm.
Although having said that, the bouncing up and down, we did chat about this interesting concept of why is it important to train long term? Because similar again to maybe weight, when people lose weight, sometimes the way we lose weight is it's not super linear, but our minds want to think linear. So when we want to lose weight, we want to lose a pound every week, ideally, or something like that. I don't know. This is just an example. Similar to strength, the idea is like when we start strength training, we have this idea we need to see improvements every single week, throughout our strength phase. But the problem is similar to losing weight, strength gains, they come in waves. Like, some weeks we're going to feel stronger, other weeks we're going to feel weaker. There's going to be like a natural up and down, which is very normal. And the reason to train long term is so we can see the average improve. We can see these improvements over time instead of just looking, 1 week at a time. We even talked about this concept. Sometimes when we start training, we can feel really strong 1 week. And because we feel so strong 1 week, we go really hard. We might add those extra 10 pounds on the squat, we might add 10 pounds on our pull ups, and we might climb even a harder grade. But because of the fact that we just felt so strong, we probably pushed our bodies a little bit more than normal. And it's very natural to be a little bit more tired the week after and maybe not be able to go as hard. And sometimes I think those things go together with some of my athletes. I've seen this where they feel really strong one day. Woo, there you go, balloons. They feel really strong 1 week, and then they're really disappointed the second week that they weren't able to repeat what they did the week before. And then they think, oh, it's all just a fluke, which is not true. Again, strength comes in waves, or like not in waves, but it's the average. We want to really look at the long-term improvements that we're making and not just like 1 week or 1 day at a time. That only means so much.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it's also like when you're thinking long term, you do want to remember like when you have bad days, that's actually maybe a good thing. Like get excited because probably on the other side of that is going to be a
Mhm.
good day. And I had to remember this. I still do, but like most of your days are going to feel good. Some days are going to be awesome and some days are going to be terrible, and this is the fluctuation, and we're not robots. Like as much as we really want to be robots and see data, we are squishy emotional beings.
Yeah.
That emotions play a really big part in how we perform as well. But you have to trust that the body will actually adapt, and it does, just maybe not at the rate or uh, the cadence that you want it to. Yeah, I don't know. I this kind of like what I'm thinking about, like as we're talking about this, is that the other side of this sometimes when you're training long term, uh, you sometimes have to get to a point of like punching the clock. Like you might lose some of the reason of why you're doing this. You can have like crisis in training sometimes. I've been through this. My road to V10 was a little bit like this, where I would struggle for like maybe a couple weeks in a row and just really question like why am I doing this? And even when you're having, it's good to ask those questions to come back to your big why, and at the same time don't stop. Just keep showing up, even if it's not at your 100%. If it's at 75%, awesome. You're punching the clock. If it's at 50%, that's okay. And just keep showing up. And I think when we do think about long term, like, oh, I have to be training year round. Again, it doesn't have to be intense all the time. Most of the time, it shouldn't be. It should be pretty moderate, and like you're feeling snappy almost every single session. Um, and yeah, you're gonna ride this roller coaster of ups and downs, and that's like a huge part of this long term relationship with training as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting when you do, play the long game, those ups and downs as part of your roller coaster, when you take a, like a broad view of like a whole year, those ups and downs are not gonna look and seem as hard looking back, as they are like when you're right in the midst of it and when you're just
Yeah.
looking at like a 2 week phase. The roller
Mhm.
coasters can feel much bigger.
Mhm.
But when you take that bigger stance, you can see, oh, I did have a roller coaster, but it wasn't as big and it wasn't as bad. It's
Yeah.
so funny you kind of brought this up because I was gonna. So when we do these community calls, we do coaching calls in our community. We bring topics, or at least I do for my calls. And today I wanted to talk about feeling overwhelmed with training. So it's funny that you brought this up, like the training crisis, and I wanted to give our members some tips around that. And I actually didn't get to it today, so I'll do it in 2 weeks. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's really important to not feel overwhelmed with training, which is also why we like to redefine what training is. Training does not mean going super hardcore all the time. It's really more about intention, focus, and consistency. Those things matter so much more than going hardcore. So, so much more. And where did I want to go with that? I forgot. I got totally derailed looking at my notes. Feeling overwhelmed with training. Oh yeah,
Did
the fun
yeah.
part, the why. The why matters so much. Like you said, it matters so, so much. And every once in a while, and you and I had a similar conversation yesterday when I asked you something about my training, I have really learned training does matter, but I have these times when I've trained so much, I really need to make sure I bring the fun back into training and climbing. Yesterday was one of these sessions. You suggested a workout to me that maybe would have been technically the better workout for me, but I could not get excited to do that better workout. So I chose a different workout that still got me to do something sort of similar, but I was excited about it. I wanted
Yeah.
to do it.
I think
And
the
I think,
question was, what sounds fun? What sounds
y-
fun to you? And you
yeah,
chose the fun one.
yeah, and I love it because I think that's one of the things that you've learned definitely about me. I always tell you that I love training. I'm intrinsically a highly motivated person. But at the same time, I can't just put my head down and just go, go, go. And I maybe that's why I'm so intrinsically motivated because I have always learned to bring that fun piece back. So it's easy for me to show up when I train because I always try to make it fun. So I will show up.
Mm.
And I think that's really, really important. So, training could mean like you can still have your intention and focus, and that can slightly change. And it's really important. Sometimes when life gets really busy, I throw in just a week of fun climbing where I'm like,
Mm.
okay, this week I'm just climbing for fun. And we actually really encourage even our gym climbers to have performance seasons. So that means when you have a performance season, your goal really is just to climb essentially for fun and climb all the climbs you want to climb and project all the things you want to project. And often we think about performance season for people outside, but we really encourage our climbers who usually don't climb outside, but like to train, to do that in the gym because that's also when you can really see your hard work pay off really well.
Mm.
And so
Mhm.
we encourage our climbers to do that at least twice a year. I would maybe even do it 3 times a year if you can. But
Yeah.
twice a year is also really good and usually really fun. And it helps reset your mind for more training. So
Yeah.
that's
I'm glad you brought yourself up as an example because you have been training very consistently for the last couple of years now. And so when you do that, you're learning like your experience level of all of the different things, like the different drills and even just what's the intention of this session? And if you can't do the drill that's listed, what else could I do that feels better to me? And but you're still sticking to that intention, you know? And the more that you train, the more that you can be more flexible, um, and adapt those days to how you feel. And I think I actually have a few athletes now who've been training with me for a long time who can do exactly like what you just did. They're like, Mercedes, I can't show up this way, but I know that here's another drill that I can do instead. And I'm like, that is to me, that makes me like those are proud moments for my athletes. You know, like that's why we train people to have that experience level and make decisions for themselves. And we're here as coaches to provide the path, but you really get to take those steps and your own steps, you know?
yeah.
Um, so the long-term training really is like a long-term education and it is like learning the craft and it doesn't mean rigidity. You know, like I think that might be another word that people might associate with training is rigidity, but really it's this flexibility. If you can be flexible, man, and if you're being flexible and being consistent, that is probably the best recipe for long-term improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. I just can't stop thinking about analogies to, nutrition. It's just very much the principles really are the same. It's
Yeah.
really, making it your lifestyle and knowing how to adapt and adjust. Let's say,
Mhm.
okay, I need some protein today. And, usually I eat chicken, but today I don't feel like chicken. Don't force yourself to eat chicken if you don't want it. But the principle is you need some protein. That's really what you need. You don't need the chicken. So you can just
Yeah.
substitute that, knowing the
Yeah.
principles behind training. For sure. And it's really fun too, once you sort of like change your lifestyle in such a way that you just incorporate training into your lifestyle, just like good nutrition, you reduce friction because it's part of your lifestyle and because people around you get used to that also. And then it's
Yeah.
part of their lifestyle that it's part of your lifestyle. So it's easier for them to support you as well. So
Yeah.
everything becomes a little bit easier and you see bigger gains.
And when it's your lifestyle, now it's a big part of your identity,
Hmm.
you know, like I think it just makes you much more confident in the thing that you're doing, you know,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
think people maybe who first start training programs might not feel like a climber.
Hmm.
But really like we're just teaching you how to show up as a climber, which means consistency and being flexible. You know, like you can easily adopt a climber mindset by just doing the thing, you know.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It really actually reminds me how I think a big piece to what changed it for me is a couple years ago. I decided I've always wanted to be an athlete. I always told myself I'm not. And I was like, well, I'm the one defining who I am. So what if I just treat myself like I am an athlete? And I think that changed my mindset. That changed my mindset around training
Yeah.
and a bunch of other things. And sure enough, it worked. I feel like I'm an athlete
That's
because I treat
awesome.
myself like an athlete, and here I
Yes.
am, and just I feel like I'm improving at a faster rate than I can even like keep up with my climbing. I seriously sometimes don't know what's going on. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I'm 41. I'm still improving so much. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
feel
I
really good.
wanted to kind of like end Kachi, you might have maybe one or two more things to add, but I did want to list some of the things that our members said after we asked them to reflect in the over the past year and where they've seen some changes. I'm not going to name any names, but I just like love some of these. So one member said significant positive changes in the peace and happiness around my training. I don't feel like I'm behind, and I also feel like I'm not pushing too hard. Consistency feels great. Another person said consistency and self-compassion exclamation point. Um, Another person said consistency and being intentional. That's amazing. We did have one member who was like crimps, I've put a lot of effort to get on hard routes with crimps, and also some finger strength training has made me feel so much stronger and comfortable on crimpy routes. The weakest style of my climbing. That's super cool. Um, working on weaknesses to pick off low-hanging fruit. I love that. This person has listed a couple different things, like they've been training, I think, like very consistently, and has seen very big improvements in mindset and physically, and just enjoyment outside. Um, and they're fairly new to climbing, and they're older. And so this makes me like super happy, like being more comfortable on lead falls, making big reachy dynamic moves. And she said that it has just been a big gift in the last year. And we
Yeah,
have so many more comments under this. But yeah, all of those things make me really happy. And I think that that's why we climb, to be happy. And if training and finding some structure and being intentional about what you're measuring, that just like will bring you even more joy. Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's a really beautiful way to end today's episode.
Yeah. Great. So then
Okay,
we'll
everybody.
see y'all next week.
That sounds good. Thank you for listening.
All right. Bye.